So I just wanted to get some background on you first. Now your website bio talks about you starting authorship on a dare from your wife. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I had just discovered Kindle and ebooks at the time, and I was downloading books like crazy, free, paid, whatever. I was reading one particular book, which shall remain forever nameless, and it was less than excellent.
Okay.
I got about 30 pages into it and finally gave up and said, I can't believe that somebody managed to publish this dreck. And I could do better than this. And my wife looked over and said, well, why don't you? Mm-hmm. Go ahead, write a book. And I thought about it for a while, and then I just fired up Word and started typing. I had a choice of 2 stories in my head at the time. One was Outland, one was We Are Legion. I went with Outland first. Yeah. But that was just a flip of a coin.
Okay, yeah. And I've told everyone already, Outland was my personal favorite by far, but apparently you've had more success with We Are Legion. Is that right?
Yep.
That's great. So what about before the authorship? What was your life like growing up, and like what inspired you to know so much about and be so involved in sci-fi?
I started reading science fiction in grade 5. I mentioned to you before, The Lost Planet by Angus McVicar was my first real novel. I read it, I was hooked, and I've been reading almost nothing but science fiction since.
Okay. Yeah. Do you feel like that's been a big inspiration for you, like a musician listens to music to inspire their music?
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, I have no formal training in creative writing or anything like that. I don't have a degree. So, you know, the style and format and everything has to come from somewhere. And I just think it comes from 50 years of having read science fiction books.
Great, great. So a couple of notes. There's not going to be any spoilers that I know of, but there's going to be spoilers of concepts that are in the books. So reader beware, you should read the book first and then watch the talk for those on the video, for those in the room. There's no hope. No, we're not going to spoil anything, but we will talk about a lot of the concepts in the books. So you've said that you were also a programmer. Was that your lifelong career?
Pretty much. I started programming in my early 20s on a Radio Shack TRS-80 as a hobby.
Yeah.
And it just, it's addictive. You know, if you're the type of personality that likes programming, it's addictive. You'll do it for fun. Mm-hmm. And it was so addictive that I ended up getting a job in the industry and moved myself up. Back in those days, you could get a job programming if you could tell what side of the keyboard was up. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't like nowadays where you practically have to have a PhD to get in at an entry level.
Sure. And so you came into programming without any degree, is that right? Oh, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, I have a tendency to come in through the back door. It's kind of strange.
Yeah, well, you did the same thing with your books.
Yeah.
So you started at 57, was it?
Oh, 51.
51, okay.
Sorry, snowboarding 51.
Snowboarding 51.
Yeah, writing 57.
Writing 57.
Yeah.
So there we go. There's two hobbies that you picked up later
yeah.
on the back door. So that's pretty interesting. You mentioned that you started without a degree. Did you ever get a degree later in life with programming?
No. I was taking electronics technology at BCIT when I switched.
Okay.
So I never finished that either.
When you switched over to writing?
No, when I switched over to programming.
Oh, programming,
yeah.
The whole time, cool. Well, I'd tell you should interview at Google, as I've told many people, but I don't want you to spend any more time away from writing books, so I'm sorry, but
okay.
Please don't.
Well, there's still a certain amount of programming going on.
Okay, Good. And actually, yeah, we have a slide that we want to show that's pretty interesting. You wrote a program to track all of the different characters in one of your books. Can you tell us about this?
Well, I called it Timealigned, which is really bogus, but I needed a name. Right? It's written in C#, and all it is a way of creating events and linking them, creating dependencies. The reason that I wrote it myself is because I wanted to have lead times, variable lead times, and so forth. And the Aeon Timeline, which was the free timeline program that I could find online, didn't offer some of the stuff that I wanted. So I hammered that together, and it became my event tracker for the Bobiverse.
That's pretty fun. Do you still use that when you're writing your books today?
I have to, yeah. The thing about the Bobiverse series is because things happen in different star systems and on different schedules, the overlaps and light speed delay and stuff like that really require a lot of planning. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, reading them is, I mean, honestly, the program could be useful for the readers. Yeah. Should make a version for us so we can track all the different bobs and.
Yeah, I actually did take a screenshot of that and publish it on my webpage, based on somebody's request.
Yeah.
And I'll have to do that again when books 4 and 5 come out.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if this is a feature request. If you wrote a program that allowed us to track where we're at in the book, so we could know where all the bobs are. But you have plenty of writing to do, so
yeah,
I'll put that on the backlog. Tell us about which works you've done. So you've done We Are Legion and Outland. How many books are in each?
Okay, well, I originally did Outland. That was my first book.
My favorite.
I wrote a little bit of the sequel, Earthside, I think about a third of it. And then I started writing Legion because I wanted to get on with things. Legion, For We Are Many, and All These Worlds form a trilogy. And they wrap up all the threads pretty well. Mm-hmm. And then I wrote Singularity Trap, which is a complete departure. And once that was out, I re-edited Outland because when Audible signed a contract with me for the Singularity Trap contract, they also signed a separate contract for Outland and Earthside. So that's an obligation.
Yeah.
So we re-edited it, and that's coming out in audio May 16th.
Great. That'll be exciting. I'll pick that up as soon as it's out. You mentioned that you work with Audible, but otherwise you're self-published, right?
Yeah, my agent shopped around Legion to all the big 5 publishers and all the various editors and so forth, and he didn't really get a bite. I think the main reason is that I am or was an unknown author, and he was shopping a trilogy, and that's kind of a no-no. You don't try to shop a series as your very first book.
Yeah.
It's too big of a gamble.
Yes.
For the publishers. So anyway, nobody bit, but I had gotten an offer from Audible. So we decided to go with the audio contract and self-publish on Ethan's ASP website. It's Author Assisted Publishing. I can never remember what the acronym stands for, but basically what he's got on there is Ian Douglas and Andrew Norton and various authors who had their rights reverted back to them. So it's not really supposed to be a big money maker. It's just a place to get your, oft-published books onto ebooks. So we put it up, essentially self-published, except that Ethan is taking care of the technical details for me.
Okay.
And when the book took off on Audible, it took off, as an ebook and a paperback, just dragged along in the current.
Yeah. Well, I remember I just finished some books from Evan Curie, I think that's how you say his name, Odyssey 1 books, and they were basic blow 'em up aliens books, and I loved them, but I was looking for something else, and I found Outland, and I was quite dismayed when I finished Outland and found out that there were, like, I didn't know who you were. I read the book. I'm like, okay, this author rocks. And so then I looked for your other works, and there was nothing else.
Yeah, so you must have picked it up before Legion was actually released.
Yeah, I think so. And then fortunately, you released the We Are Legion books pretty quickly behind each other, didn't you?
Yes. I actually had books 2 and 3 partly written by the time book 1 was released, so there wasn't much of a lead time. I think that was September 2016, and the others were published the next April and August.
Okay. And can you tell us a little bit about the difference between being a self-published author versus going the other route?
Well, the biggest single difference from my point of view is the amount of royalties. Traditionally published authors do not get a large chunk of the pie.
Right, yeah.
And traditional publishers are very slow about delivering that very small chunk. Whereas dealing with Amazon, I get paid every month, and dealing with Audible, I get paid every quarter. With Amazon, you get 70% of the list price of the book, less my agent's 15%, of course. Whereas a traditionally published author might get, I don't know, 25% of the list price or less, depending on contract.
Wow, okay.
So yeah, it makes a huge difference. Martha Wells, I don't know if you've read anything of hers, but she's one of the few authors who are very candid about their finances. And she's actually published her financial statements for a couple of years.
Wow.
I think she showed herself as making about $50,000 a year writing.
Yeah.
So her husband continues to have a day job because that's how they get the medical paid for.
Okay.
Right? So it's not really a life-changing thing for a traditional published author, unless you're like Michael Crichton or Stephen King or
Really
something
huge,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, who takes care of all the printing of the books and things like that?
Well,
And distribution?
the simple answer is Amazon.
Okay.
But my agent has taken on the job of publisher for that. So he does all the things that a self-published author would normally do.
Okay.
You know, formatting up the Word document, submitting it, making sure that it's properly formatted, getting a cover, stuff like that.
Great. Okay. That's a lot of good information. I've been curious myself.
It's not actually a lot of work in the end, and you can publish a book yourself without ever spending a penny.
Really?
If you can do your own artwork.
Okay. All right. Did you do your own artwork?
No.
No. Who did your artwork?
Jeff Brown is the guy's name. He's actually a graphics artist professionally, and I had him do all 3 covers at the same time, so that there was a theme running through it. Just the color changed and so forth.
I've been curious. Which one of these is the Bob, and which is maybe I don't even know how to pronounce his name. Medeiros. Medeiros.
Yeah, that is Bob.
Okay.
And that is actually an image from
A long, sleek one.
Yeah. I did a Blender mock-up of the ship when I was developing it, just trying to get a feel for what might work. And when Jeff was doing the cover, he asked me about it, and I said, "Yeah, I've got this Blender render. Here you go." And he put it on the cover.
That's pretty neat. Blender render. That's pretty catchy too.
Yeah.
You've been writing for how long then, since you started?
Well, Outland was published January of 2015, so a little more than 4 years. 5 years if you include the lead time on that.
That makes sense, because I think I must have picked it up right after 2015. I think is when I started reading your works.
Yeah.
So that's what, 4 years now?
4 and a bit, yeah.
That's not very long, and you have 4 or 5 books now, plus some. You did another work too, didn't you, with the group published?
Oh, the short story, yeah, in the Colony series. I think I mentioned to you that wasn't a pleasant experience, and I don't think I'll do short stories again for a while.
Okay, stick with the Bobaverse and then Outland. What other works do you have out there right now? You just mentioned that you have at least one more book with Bob.
Well, under development, the
Okay.
Bender books. There's the 3 Bobiverse books. There's Outland, Singularity Trap, and then I'm working on books 4 and 5 of the Bobiverse.
4 and 5.
Search for Bender.
Okay, cool. And then I have to ask, because I'm a huge fan, Outland 2, when do we see it?
That will be the next thing I'll work on as soon as Bender's out.
Okay.
Again, I have an obligation. I have a contract.
Yeah. What's that pressure like from the fans? Because I know I've been on your blog back when you had it active, and I was posting like a petulant child begging you to write more books. Oh, what's that pressure like?
It isn't really pressure. If you're a computer programmer or have been a computer programmer, you know about pressure. You know about bosses breathing down your neck and showing up at your cubicle every 5 minutes. Is it done yet? Is it done yet? Is it done yet? You develop a thick skin.
Okay.
I feel bad when somebody asks me about Bender and I say, no, it's not going to be ready then. I'm sorry, another 6 months. But it's not pressure, I think, the way you mean it.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I'll ask you more about that later. We're probably going to leave a lot of room for questions at the end because this universe is very big and there's a lot of interesting points. And hopefully, if you haven't read his book, you'll have it read by the end of this talk. I think you have 40 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, first things first. Do you want your brain sliced into a million pieces and turned into an AI?
My preference would be for physical immortality.
Okay.
So I'm holding out for medical advances. But if that was my only option, I'd go for it.
You would?
Yeah.
And would it be you? We talked about this before.
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting question.
Yeah, and I like to go back to the Star Trek episode where they created Thomas Riker, the duplicate Riker. Is Thomas Riker Riker? He sure thinks so.
Yeah.
But the original Riker thinks so too. But then everybody who ever got transported thinks they're the original. And if you go by the Star Trek explanation for the transporter, they're not. They got killed a long time ago.
Okay, yeah. And I mean, for me, if I were to look at it, I would think if you can control that body, then that's you, right? So if there are 2 different Rikers, I would suspect since one can't control the other's body.
No. Yeah, each of them is them, but each of them thinks that they're the original Riker.
Yeah.
In one case, in the case of Thomas, he knows that he's not, I guess because of circumstances, but he sure feels like the original guy.
Okay. And I don't think this is a spoiler, but there's an instance where, I mean, maybe it is. You tell me. And then we'll just delete the video off of YouTube. But Bob, in this book, who's an AI, is able to create sandboxes, areas of computer programming that are isolated from anything else. And he puts characters in them to be able to test things. Now, when he deletes that sandbox, did he just murder?
Yeah, I kind of just sort of sped past that point and try not to think of it too much. Technically, based on the amount of explaining that I did in the book, he is kind of deleting himself. But I'm going with the idea that the Sandbox Bob was a limited edition version of him.
Yeah.
Bob Light.
Bob Light. Okay.
Yeah.
I
That's
can
my
see
story, and I'm sticking to it.
Good. He could remove somehow the sentience maybe from the sandbox version.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So then what about an AI like Bob amongst humans? What human rights does the AI Bob have?
Well, in the book, none. And that's why I created a theocracy. I've taken a lot of flack from theists of various stripes on my website and other places because of the negative portrayal of faith and theocracies in general. Leaving aside the question of whether I was accurate about them, I needed a theocracy because that's the type of institution that would look at Bob as not being
Okay.
alive, not being sentient, not having a soul. I mean, you have to believe in the existence of a soul before you can say somebody doesn't have one.
Mm-hmm.
So he has no rights. He can be bought and sold. He can be, you know.
That explains a lot, actually. Hopefully not a spoiler. But when I was reading, I was kind of curious because it did very seem strong to me, the theocracy aspect of it, and frankly, slightly unrealistic, you know. Mm-hmm. But it makes a lot of sense that you would need that in order to take away Bob's humanity, I guess.
Yep. Take away his rights.
Interesting. And they're kind of irrelevant too, I mean, as an AI, because in some ways he's all powerful.
Yeah, he becomes all powerful because he gets the constraints taken off. Mm-hmm. And that's because of circumstances that we won't go into.
Sure.
But once the constraints on his behavior are taken off, he's a free agent, and then he can do whatever he wants, and he does.
Okay. Yeah, he does, and that's kind of what makes the book fun. One thing you were talking to me about before, and this is kind of a theme in sci-fi in general, is post-scarcity civilizations. Mm-hmm. So, can you explain what those are and what implications they have?
Well, the first problem with post-scarcity civilizations is that when people hear about them, they think, I can have whatever I want, whenever I want, to whatever degree I want. And that's not a post-scarcity civilization. That's a utopia, but probably also wishfulfillment. Yeah. Post-scarcity civilization, really, the only requirement is that all the basics be provided. Nobody has to starve. Nobody has to go homeless. Yeah. You can live a reasonable life without ever, lifting a finger. But that doesn't mean you're going to be driving a Mercedes,
right?
Or living in a mansion on the hill. The nature of reality is that there's always going to be scarcity of some kind.
Okay.
Everybody can't have everything they want.
So your living is taken care of, but your desires are still very constrained.
Yeah.
And is that what would drive then people to action in a post-scarcity society?
I think so. It's been dealt with in a number of books, but usually the basic idea is that there's some kind of universal basic income, mm-hmm. and guarantees of basic necessities and so forth. And if you just want to live at that level, great. That's good. In fact, Asimov does that. We were talking about Asimov mm-hmm. earlier. If you want to buy a Mercedes or the big mansion on the hill, you have to put some.
Then you have to work.
You have to put some elbow grease in there. Yeah, you have to find a use for yourself. You have to contribute.
Yes. So in these societies, then you're not just. Because I was wondering about that, especially in terms of Bob, who can do whatever he wants in certain ways. If what meaning life, if you can call it that, for an AI would have once it's eternal and capabilities are endless.
The thing is, that type of question hinges on your personality. Mm-hmm. It depends on what drives you. One of the I don't want to call it cliches, but a trope in fiction and maybe in real life is the person who works all their life retires and is dead in 6 months. Mm-hmm. Or they spend all their time in front of the TV set or something right. like that. Those are people who define themselves by their job.
Yeah.
They lived to work, right? If you're the type of person who works to live, once the financial constraints are taken off, there's lots of stuff to do. In Bob's case, explore, mm-hmm. Or be a Batinsky, and get involved in the Deltons and stuff like that. But he's not limited by need for a job. He's able to define his own goals. And I think if you can do that, you'll be fine in any post-scarcity society.
Interesting. As long as you have something to work for.
Yeah.
Okay. You have a lot of specific details about solar systems and galaxies in this book. Did you research all that just for this book, or was that something you're already very familiar with?
I was an amateur astronomer when I was a teenager.
Okay.
I actually built my own reflector, telescope.
Wow.
Ground the mirror, the whole bit. And boy, is that boring. Hour upon hour. But that's back in the dim mists of prehistory. We didn't know as much as astronomy in those days, but I've kept up with it. Mm-hmm. I read the magazines and the articles on PhysOrg and stuff like that. And the only thing I really had to research was specific stellar systems.
Okay.
I needed a stellar system that's 10 light years away. Okay, that's Epsilon Eridani. Delta Eridani's over there, and so forth. But that's just detail work.
Okay, so all that detail work is accurate then, for the most part, in your book. Wow. So even how accurate are you with the actual composition of the planets in those systems?
Oh, that's total fabrication.
Okay. Good to know. Yeah. Good to know. And for instance, what is an Oort cloud? And how did you know about that?
Well, that's actually discussed quite regularly in scientific articles and so forth. You've got the planets going out from the sun all the way to Pluto, which may or may not be a planet. Then you've got the...
That's messed up what they did.
Yeah. Then you've got the Kuiper belt, which is outside of that. And then you've got the Oort cloud, which is this huge cloud of mostly empty space. But... small icy bodies and stuff like that circling the sun, and that may extend, according to some people, up to a light year or more out. Okay. Like, it's very diffuse.
Wow. And you got all this just from growing up, learning about all these things. Mm. Okay, interesting. What about, you said you had a thick skin from the process when fans like me, are constantly pestering you. Do you ever let your fans be part of the writing process at all?
There are legal aspects to that. If a fan makes a suggestion and you take it and run with it, you could get sued for part of the royalties. Mm-hmm. That was my idea. You ran with my idea. It's just a variation on the "you stole my song" lawsuit. Yeah. So I make in the Facebook group, Fans of the Bobiverse, it has been made very clear in the rules of the group that if you bring up any kind of an idea, it's public domain. You have no ownership of anything you say in that group. So just in case somebody does say something that makes me go, they don't have any kind of legal claim to it. And and I said early on that if somebody started discussing details of some kind of plot or something like that, I would basically unsubscribe. Yeah.
So you kind of have to put the earmuffs on.
I have to put the blinkers on and everything like that and just not look.
Okay, interesting. I didn't know what that world was like until now.
Well, that's why fanfic is not well thought of, if you will, in forums and stuff like that, because it tends to be all about copyright violation.
Oh, interesting. Is there legal implications then for someone who's writing fan fiction as well? Because then they're kind of stealing
Yeah, the thing about copyright is you have to defend it or you lose it. Mm-hmm. When companies sue some guy, just outside of hope for something, it's not because they're big, bad companies. But generally speaking, you have to defend your copyright or you lose it. Mm-hmm. So when fanfic authors start writing in an author's universe without permission, the author has a choice of, or usually it's the publisher, of course, because they're the ones who have the legal obligation and so forth, but they have to go after them. Or it's implied permission to continue to do so.
Okay, so my idea that I posted on your blog about Micronesia taking over Alaska with 6-year-olds in Outland.
That wasn't going to happen anyway.
That's tough. Well, so I'm just going to ask a couple random questions, and then we'll pass it off to the audience, and hopefully they'll have some questions for you. First of all, whose brain would you like to have mapped into a computer besides your own?
Einstein.
Einstein.
I know it's a cliche response, but hey, it's also a very true one.
What do you think he would do with that eternity that he had?
He would make copies of himself, and they would all get together and start working on theories.
And theories.
Yeah.
Okay. What about, there's a lot of notions of existentialism in this book especially between the eternal nature of an AI versus the ephemeral nature, and you use that word a lot in your book. I think I probably learned it from your book even, of humans. So did you ponder on existentialism a lot in that regard?
Well, it's not new thoughts.
Okay.
I didn't have to start thinking about it for the book specifically, although I did a little bit of research on some of the philosophical implications. But yeah, the whole question of existence and self and stuff like that. Well, everything comes back to Star Trek, doesn't it? Transporters.
Yeah. So tell us about the transporter question. Did you already mention that in this talk?
I mentioned it in passing once before, but for those who don't know, the original idea of the transporter in Star Trek was that it disassembles you and scans you and then creates a duplicate of you over there. In TNG, they tried to tweak that a little bit, and they put in the containment field and tried to say that you're actually transporting all the molecules over, but it was too little too late. The basic idea is that you're destroyed here, and a copy of you is created over there that thinks it's you, but you're dead.
It's paramount to painless dying.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. And so then it's, I guess you have to ask the question of, is your own consciousness irrelevant to you as long as your memory and your actions go on? But I'd say most people would probably be against that.
Yeah. Well, the philosophical discussion usually comes down to continuity. If you can show continuity, all the way through your life, then it's you. Mm-hmm. One of the thought experiments that's done is, and I mentioned this briefly in the book, is if you had a stroke and part of your brain died and they were able to replace it with an artificial neuron or set of neurons. So now you're like 5% artificial. Are you still you? Right? So now you have another stroke. And, oh, wait a second. This was in Singularity Trap. That's why you're looking at me funny. Oh. So now you have another stroke. They replace more brain. Now you're 10% artificial. Are you still you? Right? You keep this up. Now you're 90% artificial.
Right.
Someday you're 100% artificial. Are you still you? And the thinking is that if you can draw a continuous four-dimensional line from the old you to the current you without any breaks, it's you.
Interesting.
And the problem with the transporter is there's a cut.
What about when you take that brain that once it's been completely segmented over to 100% and then you copy it? What's the case then?
Well, if you go with the philosophy, the copy is not you. It's a copy of you.
Okay.
Because there's no continuity.
Even if you copied it and then shuffled it under some cups and you wouldn't know which is which?
Well, you might not know which is the copy of you, but one of them is.
One is you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that was interesting about the Bobs because there's this appeal to the eternal nature of an AI. There's this appeal to I want to live forever. I would love to be an AI. But that's constantly stifled by the idea that you can never actually be that AI. Your memories will be something like you will be, but you will never be.
Yeah. I'd still do it.
You'd still do it?
Yeah.
Why would you do it?
Just the idea that there's a me out there.
Reassuring to you?
Yeah, and even if it isn't me, it would still have my goals and plans and preferences and so forth, and it would still do what I would have done.
So you'd be happy to see the future being affected by your desires and goals?
Yeah.
Good answer. Then, let's see. So there's, with both Outland and We Are Legion, and I haven't read Singularity Trap. I'm excited to still get to read at least one more book from you. There is an infinite number of worlds you can create with these books. You know, there's nearly infinite. With We Are Legion, it's exploration. I guess Outland, same thing, but exploring differently. How far do you think you'll take these books?
I will keep writing novels as long as the audience remains interested. I have no trouble coming up with new ideas. I have an ideas list that's up around 150 items at this point, so I'm never going to get through that in my lifetime unless that medical breakthrough.
Yeah, or the AI.
Or the AI thing, yeah. But yeah, it really comes down to popularity. If it starts to get stale and people stop buying the books, then I'll cut it off and go on to something else. But otherwise, yeah, I'm quite happy to keep.
Well, that's
going.
very reassuring for me because I can't get enough of them. So.
Cool.
Great. Well, that's all the questions I had for you. Let's pass some questions off to the audience. Matt, would you mind tossing around the mic?
First of all, as far as spoilers go, I know the ship has sailed, but the entire outline of the book is up on that slide?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool.
It wouldn't mean much to you unless you read it.
Fair enough.
At least that's what I think. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
I had a question about, I guess, philosophy. You seem to have some experience there on who have you read or who are your influences, both like science fiction writers and if there's anybody contemporary philosophers.
In terms of philosophers, I haven't. I have listened to Plato's Republic, and I've read some of the philosophy of Socrates and stuff like that. But mostly it's research oriented. I'm a very pragmatic person, so I tend to read what I need to read in order to get to where I want to get to. I love The Good Place, though. Yeah, I don't know if anybody has not watched that, it is well worth watching. Very well done. Yeah, I've actually downloaded a couple of Audible books on philosophy, specifically for the research that I did on the Bobverse and on Singularity Trap. In terms of authors, I think my two biggest influences are Heinlein and Niven.
That's good.
Although, there's a large smattering of Campbell and Hamilton and everybody else like that too.
Nice. Mine are Orson Scott Card and Dennis E. Taylor. Yeah.
Okay, to pick up on that, you're an avid reader. You have been an avid reader of science fiction all your life since you were young.
Yep.
Do you find yourself sometimes taking too much of ideas that you've read in the past, and you find yourself incorporating them, and you have to stop and say, what can I do to make that my own?
That actually isn't as much of a problem in general as most people think. As they say in the writers in the writing industry, ideas are cheap, right? It's the execution of the idea that makes the book. The Martian is just Robinson Crusoe, right? In fact, you can probably, well, if you look at any half dozen science fiction or thriller movies, Deep Star 6, Leviathan, Alien, they're all the same theme. Bunch of people get stuck in a limited space with a monster that's eating them one at a time. It's a very simple idea, but how you execute it right? Deep Star 6, Alien, right?
I actually have two questions. One is about the audiobook itself. I love that. I actually listened to all your books while I was biking, and the narrator, Ray Porter, did a fantastic job where all of these things I still remember them. So my question is, how much input does a author have that goes into the narration of the book? And you also mentioned you were editing like your book for Audible. I'm wondering what kind of editing happens there, and if you had that in your mind when you were writing that book, the Bobbyverse universe. My second question is around, and I apologize for using the word, the books feel a little rushed. Like there's a lot of stuff, like you could have made it a 10, book arc. Like there's a lot of stuff like the Madeiras or the Chinese contingent first contact story that would be great to know about. Is there any plan for like a collection of short stories in the Bobbyverse universe that talks about those things, even the fall of civilization and those type of stuff?
Okay,
That's a big question.
yeah. Well, let's answer the second one first. I think the reason that the books feel rushed really comes down to my inexperience when I was writing them. Inexperienced writers will either tend to underwrite or overwrite massively. And part of learning the craft is getting the mix right. I'm an underwriter, massive underwriter by nature. My first draft of a book will be 40,000 words. And then I have to figure out how to fill it in to make it 80,000 words. And it usually consists of things like, I don't know, dialogue. But yeah, it really comes down to inexperience. If I rewrote these, I would put a lot more detail in. I would spend a lot more time on some of the subplots. And as far as short stories and stuff like that, yeah, that's definitely a plan. I've got novel ideas, I've got short story ideas, and they'll all come together. To answer the first question, I'm sure that a big author like John Scalzi could demand a particular narrator if he wanted to and get away with it. As a noob, I had no say. Although I suppose if I'd kicked up a fuss, well, maybe not, I don't know. Anyway, I had no idea who Ray Porter was anyway, so I was in no position to do any kicking. As it turns out, I'm very glad they picked him. Before he started on the recordings, though, Ray contacted me and he asked me how some of these characters sounded to me in my head. And Guppy is obvious. He sounds like Akbar. Butterworth, I heard sounding like Colonel Fowler in Chicken Run, right? And Ray pulled it off. I mean, he really pulled it off. Homer, it sounded to me like Bill Murray in Ghostbusters, for instance. Stuff like that. Most of them, though, he just went with it.
So you mentioned overwriting and underwriting as one of the lessons you learned in the process. Is there anything else, like overall, has your process for writing changed as you've gotten more experience with it?
There are so many things that change or that you improve on as you get better. One of the things that I find irritating, actually, about my first book, especially now, is the degree to which Bob shrugs, grins, rolls his eyes, and stuff like that. Those are beats versus dialogue tags. Mm-hmm. Right? Dialogue tags are he said, he replied, he asked, she shouted, stuff like that. Beats are where you perform an action that doesn't necessarily relate to what you're actually saying, but establishes who's talking. Now, Dennis sat down, then turned to look at the audience. Hi, I'm me. My repertoire for beats was limited. I hope I've improved on that over time, but yeah, that's another thing. If I was writing it again from scratch, I would do a lot better with that.
All right. Well, there's no more questions. We got one more question.
Any idea when the Bender books are coming out?
Oh, God.
Is Bender the bad guy? These ones.
I had originally said that I would be trying to publish them by summer 2019. Right now, I'm hoping to finish them by the end of summer 2019. I have always said that my writing suffers during snowboarding season. And this year, I did a lot of snowboarding at Whistler, so my writing really suffered. So I'm behind schedule.
Okay, we got one more question way in the back. Our tech guy.
Crash.
So, when you started writing, what did that do to your habits of reading?
Oh, God. Yeah, this is a common problem with writers, actually. Once you start learning the techniques, story arcs, all of the things that go into writing, you become very aware of them. It's just like...
Seeing the sausage being made? Seeing the sausage being made?
Yeah, you're seeing the sausage being made. I now find myself much less tolerant of books, and for that matter, movies and TV shows, simply because I can see what the writer's trying to do, and I can see when they don't quite pull it off. And it can be eye-rolling.
All right, thank you. Well, we really appreciate having you on. For those of you who are interested, I work with the Talks team at Google. Feel free to approach me afterwards and talk about bringing your favorite authors up on stage. So give a hand of applause for Dennis.